In 1903, 41-year-old farmer Jacob Wolf emigrated from southern Russia to Turtle Lake, North Dakota, driven by the hope of building a successful future amid rising anti-German sentiments back home. 2 years later, in 1905, Jacob married Beate Bossert, a 35-year-old woman who had also journeyed from southern Russia to the United States. Together, they operated one of the most prosperous farmsteads in Turtle Lake while raising their 6 daughters: Bertha, aged 13, Maria, 9, Edna, 8, Lydia, 5, Martha, 3, and their youngest, 9-month-old Emma. The family fostered a close bond with their 13-year-old shore boy and farmhand, Jacob Jake Hofer, who was treated like a son. Well liked in their community of fellow German-Russian immigrants, the Wolfs' lives were not without conflict. They had recently quarreled with neighboring farmer Henry Lehr over a dispute involving their farm dogs attacking one of Lehr's cows. This argument, which centered on compensation for the incident that had occurred 6 months earlier in November 1919, was the only known source of tension, as there had been no evidence of hostility in the months that followed. In the early hours of April 24, 1920, following a heavy storm, a neighbor named John Kraft was driving past the Wolf farmstead when he noticed an unsettling silence. Clothes had been left hanging to dry for over a day, and 3 horses remained saddled by the haystacks, an unusual sight for the bustling farm. Typically, the Wolves carried out numerous chores throughout the day, but today, no one seemed to be around. Until this moment, life had unfolded as usual. Jacob and Beate had just celebrated their birthdays the previous week, and Jacob had even planned to purchase a drill press on April 22nd, although he never went to collect it. Concerned, John returned home and informed his wife about the eerie quiet at the Wolf's farm. Together, they decided to return and check on their neighbors. Upon their arrival, they were met with the sound of a child's cries, but nothing else. As they searched the property, they discovered the bodies of Jacob, Maria, and Edna in the barn. Jacob bore a large, gaping wound in his back, the result of being shot twice, once from a distance and again at close range. The wound was several inches in diameter, having torn 3 ribs from his spine. In the barn, the bodies of 10-year-old Maria and 8-year-old Edna were found, lying beneath a layer of hay and dirt. Both girls had been shot in the back of the head at close range, their hair and skin marked with gunpowder residue. The Crafts then entered the Wolf home through the kitchen, where they were immediately confronted by a chilling sight: a trail of blood on the floor, leading ominously toward the cellar door. With bated breath, the couple descended into the cellar, only to be confronted by a horrifying scene. The first body they encountered was that of Beate Wolf, the mother, who had suffered a gunshot wound to the back at close range, much like her husband. Beside her lay their eldest daughter, Bertha, who had been shot in the face and bore additional injuries consistent with a hatchet or similar weapon. Young Lydia had also endured hatchet wounds, along with a gunshot wound behind her left ear. Martha was the only one not shot. Instead, she had been brutally beaten to death with the broadside of a hatchet. The final body in the cellar was that of the family's farmhand, Jacob Hofer, who had been shot through the neck, fatally striking his jugular vein. As the Crafts continued their search of the property for any signs of life, they discovered the youngest member of the family, 9-month-old Emma, crying in her crib. She had not been fed or changed in at least 2 days. After their grim discovery of the Wolf family's bodies, the Crafts attempted to contact the police using the landline at the farm, only to realize that the phone line had been cut. Concerned for Emma's safety, they decided to take her back to their home to protect her in case the perpetrator was still at large. The Crafts then contacted the Washburn police, detailing the horrific scenes they had witnessed at the Wolf farmstead. When authorities arrived at the farm, they were confronted with a grisly scene. Investigators examined the bodies and determined that the murders had likely occurred approximately 48 hours earlier, around April 22, 1920. As they scoured the crime scene and began collecting evidence, several peculiar details caught their attention. Notably, the phone lines had been cut, but the reason for this remained unclear. Reports from various German newspapers at the time indicated that the bodies of both 13-year-olds, Bertha and Jacob Hofer, were found wearing gloves. It remains uncertain whether the information about the teens wearing gloves is accurate, but if true, it suggests that Bertha and Jacob may have encountered the perpetrator shortly after returning from working in the fields or completing chores. It is believed that they were killed in the kitchen before their bodies were dragged down to the cellar. Only one large pool of blood was found on the kitchen floor, leading many to speculate that Jacob may have been the only victim slain in that location. Meanwhile, blood spatters on the cellar walls indicated that Beta, Lydia, and Martha were likely killed there, and possibly Bertha as well. As the police scoured the property for clues and evidence, they discovered the hatchet believed to have been used to kill several members of the Wolf family, along with bloody rags and overalls hidden in the kitchen. Authorities suspected that the overalls had been used in an attempt to clean the floor and that they belonged to Jacob Wolf. Evidence indicated that Jacob had been shot and killed in the yard before his body was dragged into the barn and covered with hay, similar to two of his daughters who lay dead beside him. Investigators traced the footsteps of Maria and Edna through the house, noting that their trail abruptly ended at a window. This led authorities to believe that the sisters had attempted to escape through the window to flee from the perpetrator. They tried to hide in the barn beneath a stack of hay, but were ultimately discovered and shot in the back of the head at point-blank range. Ian Mayer, an auctioneer assisting the police with the investigation, claimed to have discovered the gun believed to be the murder weapon in a pond just a short distance from the property. However, tracing the weapon back to its owner or manufacturer proved nearly impossible. It was not a firearm owned by the Wolf family, and despite questioning neighbors, no one seemed to recognize the shotgun. The police were unable to link the weapon to anyone in the vicinity, leaving them stumped about who had brutally murdered the Wolfs and Jacob Hofer. Witness statements published in various German newspapers indicated that gunshots were heard on the Wolf farm around 10 a.m. on April 22nd. In the farming community, the sound of gunshots was not unusual, often attributed to pest control, so it did not raise immediate concern for the neighbor who heard it. At around 11:30 a.m., 13-year-old Bertha and Jacob Hofer were spotted in a field not far from the farmhouse. This supports the idea that they were not present in the house when the killings began. They likely returned after finishing their work and were subsequently murdered. After 2 days of silence, concern prompted John Kraft to check on his neighbors, leading him to the grim discovery of their deaths. It was during this investigation that police learned of the feud between the Wolfs and their neighbor, Henry Lehr, which stemmed from an incident 6 months earlier involving the Wolf's dogs biting Lehr's cattle. Consequently, the police began to suspect Henry Lehr's involvement in the family massacre. Little is known about Henry Lehr, except that he was born in southern Russia and immigrated to North Dakota with his parents in 1886. He married a woman named Lydia in 1912, and like Jacob Wolf, became a farmer with property situated not far from the Wolf's homestead. Although Henry was known to be reserved, he assisted other local residents with the upkeep of the Wolf's farm after the tragic events unfolded. As the investigation progressed, rumors began circulating in the community, suggesting that he was being considered a suspect in the case. The sheriff had reportedly heard that Henry had previously spread rumors about Jacob Wolf, claiming he had inappropriate relations with one of the neighbor's daughters. The veracity of these claims remained unconfirmed, leading many to dismiss them as wild, scandalous rumors. However, this gossip, combined with the earlier cattle incident, contributed to a growing feud between the Lehrs and the Wolfs. In the aftermath of the crime, while assisting with the upkeep of the Wolf's farm, Henry allegedly suggested to the sheriff that they check the chicken coop for clues. When police investigated, they discovered 3 12-gauge shotgun shells hidden in the hay evidence they had apparently overlooked during an earlier search of the co-op. This finding significantly raised their suspicions about Henry. When questioned about the discovery of the shotgun shells, Henry claimed that one of Beta's brothers had suggested checking the chicken coop for clues. In the early hours following the discovery of the bodies, County Sheriff Ole Stefford was left alone at the farm while Beta's brothers Emanuel Hofer, who was caring for baby Emma, drove away to fetch breakfast. Around 5:30 a.m., Stefford noticed a man pull up to the farm in a car. The man glanced through the windows before walking toward the barn. Stefford intercepted him, discovering it was Henry Lehr, who had one hand suspiciously lodged in his pocket. Stefford then noticed that Henry no longer kept his hand guarded in his pocket. News of the horrific murders quickly spread throughout the Dakotas, coinciding with a heated political battle. The governor of North Dakota, Lynn Fraser, and Attorney General William Langer were vying for the Republican nomination. After a week of silence from the governor regarding the gruesome murders, Langer sent his own investigators to assist with the case. With public pressure mounting on law enforcement to find answers, Langer had an ulterior motive. He aimed to garner public support to secure his election victory. He visited the crime scene alongside the chief of police from Bismarck, a special agent from the North Pacific Railway, and a private operative from the Field Detective Agency of St. Paul. Langer even donated $1,000 to aid the investigation, while his political rival refused to allocate state funds to help apprehend the killer. As a result, public sentiment began to favor Langer for his apparent commitment to justice. Meanwhile, the Turtle Lake community rallied to raise over $10,000 as a reward for anyone who could bring the Wolf's murderer or murderers to justice. Despite their solidarity, residents lived in fear for their safety, with many farmers staying awake at night, shotguns in hand, anxious that the murderer was still at large. The funeral for the Wolf family and Jacob Hofer drew an estimated 2,500 attendees, with some traveling as far as 50 miles, a significant journey in the 1920s. At the funeral, rumors circulated that Henry Lehr had insisted on viewing the bodies of all the victims in open caskets. However, many news articles refuted this claim. In fact, the custom among the predominantly German-Russian community in Turtle Lake at that time was to have open caskets during funerals. On May 6th, shortly after the funerals, the Wolf property, along with their animals and belongings, was auctioned off. This decision seemed hasty, given that it had been less than 3 weeks since the horrific crime occurred, and potentially critical evidence could have been lost in the process. While Henry attended the funeral, investigators conducted inquiries at his farm, including questioning one of his daughters. She recalled a day the previous week when her father had been absent for much of the morning, though she couldn't specify which day. Evidence against Henry Lehr was accumulating, though it could be argued that much of it was circumstantial. With mounting pressure on law enforcement to make an arrest, police arrived at Lehr's farm on May 12th and took him into custody, convinced that the circumstantial evidence was sufficient to implicate him in this heinous crime. While transporting Henry to the station, police stopped at the side of the road to arrest a supposed criminal, who turned out to be an undercover officer. The two were placed in the same cell at the Washburn police station, where they remained for hours. The undercover officer extensively questioned Henry, with police hoping to coax a confession from him. However, their efforts proved fruitless. When police finally questioned Henry, they had already concluded he was guilty. They interrogated him about how and why he killed the Wolfs, showing him crime scene photos and repeatedly urging him to confess. Throughout the grueling hours of interrogation, Henry consistently denied any involvement and maintained his innocence. Investigators warned Henry that an angry mob was waiting outside the station, threatening that he would be attacked if he didn't confess. After hours of intense questioning, Henry eventually admitted to killing the Wolf family and their farmhand. However, he later claimed that he confessed out of fear for his life. The officers assured him that he would be safer in a jail cell and that they would protect him from the furious residents outside. In his confession, Henry stated that on Thursday, April 22nd, he had decided to confront Jacob Wolf to demand compensation for the injury his cattle sustained 6 months prior. This timeline seemed odd to many. Henry claimed he entered the Wolf property from the north side around 11:30 a.m., where he allegedly got into an altercation with Jacob. However, this raises several questions. If he had indeed approached from the north, multiple neighbors working in their fields that morning would likely have seen him, yet no one recalled seeing Henry near the Wolf property. Additionally, if Henry arrived at 11:30, an hour and a half after neighbors reported hearing gunshots, this timeline doesn't align with the events, as the Wolfs would already have been dead by then, except for 13-year-old Bertha and Jacob Hofer. Furthermore, Henry walked to the farm, which was guarded by the Wolf's herding dogs, including the one that had previously attacked Lehr's cattle. Surely the dogs would have barked to alert anyone of an intruder. Henry also claimed to have entered the Wolf home, but this seemed questionable given that he and Jacob were not on friendly terms. Would Jacob have allowed Henry into his home, especially considering their prior conflict? Henry claimed that an altercation between him and Jacob escalated in the kitchen, resulting in Jacob pulling out a shotgun. However, it was established that the Wolfs did not own the shotgun used in the killings. According to Henry, they struggled over the weapon, which discharged twice, fatally injuring Beta and Jacob Hofer. This narrative contradicts the evidence found in the cellar, which indicated that Beta was killed there, not in the kitchen. Henry then alleged that Jacob fled the house, prompting him to reach into a dresser drawer to reload the gun. He claimed to have fired once from a distance, hitting Jacob, and then shot him a second time at close range. A critical question arises: how did Henry know where the ammunition was stored, unless he had seen Jacob retrieve it earlier? Henry also stated that he chased Edna and Maria toward the barn after they fled the home, but once again, this timeline raises discrepancies. Henry claimed he killed Edna and Maria instantly, while the 3 other daughters were left screaming at the top of their lungs in the farmhouse. He then returned to the house, murdered the remaining 3 girls in the kitchen, and used a hatchet to dispose of their bodies in the cellar. However, there was no evidence to corroborate Henry's assertion that the 3 daughters found in the cellar had been killed in the kitchen. Afterward, he took Jacob's body and placed it in the barn, covering it with hay and dirt, just as he had done with Edna and Maria. Henry asserted that he was unaware Emma was in the house because he did not enter the bedroom, a claim that seems highly unlikely. Given the circumstances, it's hard to believe that if a gun had been fired, Emma wouldn't have cried out. How could he have overlooked the sound of a distressed infant, leaving one silent survivor? Henry's confession was fraught with inaccuracies that did not align with the evidence found at the crime scene. Nevertheless, police accepted his confession as the truth and proceeded to arrest him. Law enforcement even contradicted themselves when communicating with the public about Henry's arrest, stating he was not in his right mind and that the murders had not been premeditated, despite their initial theory suggesting otherwise. Furthermore, Henry's first statement about his whereabouts on the day of the murders, recorded on April 30th, appeared to be completely ignored. He claimed to have started his day as usual, plowing the fields around 8 a.m. and working for approximately 4 hours until midday. Henry claimed he saw someone working in the fields belonging to Jacob Wolf between 10 and 11 a.m. However, due to the distance approximately half a mile, he could not identify who it was. He took his lunch break from noon to 3 p.m., during which he cleaned the barn, insisting to police that he never left the property, a statement corroborated by his wife, Lydia. Henry resumed plowing from around 3 p.m. until 7 p.m. that evening. Throughout the day, he also interacted with neighbors working in their own fields, including a man named Joseph Mayer, who lived to the south of the Lehr property. Henry and Joseph Mayer discussed the railroad strike, during which Henry mentioned his intention to go into town that day. However, he explained that he needed to stay home because his children were feeling unwell, a concern echoed by Lydia. Lydia fully corroborated Henry's account of the day, informing police that she knew precisely where he was during the day, detailing his chores around the farm and his time plowing the fields. She stated that she never saw her husband leave the property. Shortly after, Henry Lehr was put on trial for the murders and entered a plea of guilty. The judge advised Henry to secure a defense attorney if he intended to plead not guilty. However, he refused. He sought the fastest way to be locked behind bars, regardless of his guilt. This decision was unusual, but as previously mentioned, he feared for his life, believing that prison was the safest option after police allegedly warned him of an angry mob waiting to lynch him. Henry also claimed he was physically assaulted by the officers during questioning, resulting in bruises all over his body, which were later corroborated by both a prison doctor and a barber. He recounted, "They cursed me, took my chair away, and made me stand until I felt dizzy and faint." Throughout this ordeal, he maintained his innocence, insisting he knew nothing about the murders. Henry recounted a moment when he believed a man, whom he thought was a railroad detective, struck him on the side of the head and pulled his hair. The man then sat across the table and detailed how the murders supposedly occurred, dictating what Henry was to say. He brandished a club in Henry's face, threatening that if he did not comply, he would beat his brains out. Overwhelmed, Henry broke down in tears and agreed to say whatever the officers wanted. After receiving a guilty verdict and being sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor, Henry requested to speak with the judge to prove his innocence, but he was denied that opportunity for several weeks. It wasn't until November 1920 that Henry's lawyers filed a motion to withdraw his guilty plea and change it to not guilty for a trial on the merits. However, this request was once again denied. A few weeks after his imprisonment, the prison doctor examined Henry and found him to be in good physical health, except for some small patches of discoloration on his cheekbones. The doctor noted no bruising or swelling, though any bruises might have faded by that time. Conversely, the barber observed that Henry appeared beat up with bruises covering his face and swelling on the top of his head. Henry confided in the barber about being assaulted by the interrogating officers. When numerous family members visited him shortly after his incarceration, they were informed that he was in no condition to be seen. The sheriff denied that any incidents of verbal threats or physical assaults had occurred during Henry's interrogation. Authorities maintained that Henry confessed of his own accord after being shown crime scene images and confronted about inconsistencies in his story. The question of whom to believe remains a topic of intense debate. One of the most pressing questions is whether Henry Lehr was guilty of killing the Wolf family and their farmhand, or if someone else was responsible. What kind of individual would commit such a heinous act against a well-liked family, especially one with innocent children? What motive could possibly justify the slaughter of an entire family while leaving the youngest member alive? According to several sources, the cattle that had been attacked were sold for a good price shortly after Lehr was imprisoned, indicating that the damage to the cow was not fatal and had minimal impact on its value. Was Henry the sole perpetrator? If he was, what was his true motive? If he wasn't responsible, then who was? Law enforcement seemed eager to quickly apprehend a suspect. Was Henry Lehr merely a scapegoat, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Moreover, other community members exhibited inconsistencies in their statements. Why were they not investigated further? Political figures appeared anxious to close the case swiftly, likely seeking to bolster their support from the local constituency in anticipation of the upcoming election. Were the evidence and witness statements properly evaluated? Political figures hesitated to assist in ensuring a fair trial for Henry, fearing it might jeopardize their political support. Was there any physical evidence directly linking Henry Lehr to the murders of the Wolf family, or was he a victim of manipulative politicians and corrupt law enforcement? Regardless of his guilt, Henry Lehr spent only 5 years in prison before passing away in March 1925 due to complications from appendicitis surgery. His marriage to Lydia deteriorated, and they divorced in 1922. Struggling to care for her family, Lydia sent their children to an orphanage, where tragedy struck again when one of the Lehr children was killed in a wagon accident. One of the Lehr daughters, Blanche, returned home after her father's death, but struggled with anxiety and ridicule for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, young Emma Wolf was taken in by her aunt and uncle, living with them until their deaths in 1933. Afterward, Emma resided with a local grocer until she graduated from high school at 18. She later married and had 3 children, leading a full and happy life. Emma passed away at the age of 84 in 2003. According to numerous sources, the Wolf family farm still stands today, though only a windmill remains of the original structure. According to Vernon Keel, author of a book on the Wolf family murders, crucial evidence in the case was not preserved. As a result, we may never uncover the identity of the individual responsible for this heinous crime. A century later, it remains uncertain whether Henry Lehr was truly guilty. If he was innocent, he endured a significant miscarriage of justice. His family also faced immense hardship following his incarceration, while the remaining members of the Wolf and Wolsert families struggled to cope with their loss. If Henry was indeed innocent, the true killer or killers of the Wolf family have evaded justice for over 100 years, and tragically, it seems unlikely they ever will. The community has never forgotten the brutal murders of the Wolf family and Jacob Hofer. Over the years, numerous theories have surfaced regarding the identity of the true killer, with some locals suggesting that the real perpetrator may never have been apprehended. This case remains one of the most infamous unsolved murders in North Dakota's history, captivating both historians and true crime enthusiasts. Recently, there has been a resurgence of interest in the case, with amateur sleuths and investigators meticulously combing through old records and interviewing descendants of those involved, all in hopes of uncovering new insights into the chilling events that unfolded on that fateful day. Despite the passage of time, the tragic story of the Wolf family and their farmhand continues to resonate deeply within the community. Memorials and gatherings have been organized to honor their memory, and the impact of their loss is still felt among residents. Over the decades, the case has evolved into a cautionary tale about the dangers of unresolved conflicts and the far-reaching effects of violence. For many, it serves as a poignant reminder of life's fragility and the importance of community vigilance against potential threats. The unsolved nature of the Wolf family murders underscores the limitations of the law enforcement system at the time and raises important questions about how justice is pursued in small communities. With the advent of new technologies and forensic techniques, many have called for a reevaluation of the evidence in the case, hoping that modern investigative methods might finally provide closure for the affected families. Whether the truth will ever be uncovered remains uncertain, but the hope for justice continues to burn brightly in the hearts of those committed to honoring the memory of the Wolf family. In conclusion, the tragic events surrounding the Wolf family murders remain etched in the collective memory of the Turtle Lake community. The quest for answers and justice persists to this day, as residents cling to the hope that the truth will one day be revealed. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the profound impact of violence on families and communities, underscoring the importance of vigilance and conflict resolution. As long as the case remains unsolved, the legacy of the Wolf family will endure, acting as both a cautionary tale and a call to action for those committed to preventing similar tragedies in the future. As time marches on, the story of the Wolf family stands as a reminder not only of a tragic event but also of a community's resilience that refuses to forget. The community's ongoing efforts to honor the memory of the Wolf family through memorials and storytelling underscore the importance of their legacy. The tragic fate of the Wolves is woven into Turtle Lake's history and culture, shaping the region's narrative and influencing the values of its residents. Ultimately, this case remains a poignant chapter in North Dakota's history, urging current and future generations to reflect on the lessons learned from the past. In the years following the murders, numerous books, documentaries, and articles have been created, each delving into the complexities of the case and the lives of those affected. These works have enriched the broader understanding of the historical context surrounding the Wolf family and the challenges faced by the German-Russian immigrant community in North Dakota during that era. By exploring the intricacies of the case, these narratives aim not only to uncover the truth, but also to honor the memories of those who lost their lives in such a brutal fashion. The legacy of the Wolf family remains alive in Turtle Lake, where residents continue to gather to share stories and remember the lives lost. Annual events, such as memorial services and community gatherings, strengthen the bonds among residents and ensure that the memories of the Wolf family and Jacob Hofer are not forgotten. As the community reflects on this tragic chapter in their history, they also celebrate the strength and resilience that have emerged in its wake. The story of the Wolf family is not merely one of loss, it embodies the enduring spirit of a community dedicated to honoring their memory. As new generations grow up hearing the story of the Wolf family, there is hope that they will carry forward the lessons learned from this tragedy. By nurturing a culture of remembrance and understanding, the Turtle Lake community seeks to prevent similar events from happening in the future. This dedication to honoring the past while looking toward the future serves as a testament to the strength of community ties and the importance of vigilance in upholding the values that define them. In summary, the story of the Wolf family and their tragic fate continues to resonate throughout Turtle Lake and beyond. The unsolved nature of the case has sparked enduring interest in both historical and criminal investigation circles, ensuring that the victims' memories persist. As the community grapples with the legacy of this dark chapter, they remain committed to preserving the lessons learned and advocating for justice, not only for the Wolf family but for all victims of violence. The narrative of the Wolf family serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of community, compassion, and the pursuit of truth.